And thank you for joining us. Welcome to the 2020 American Diabetes Association Living with Diabetes Ask the Expert series. Today's topic is Build Healthy Meals While Eating at Home. We will be talking about eating healthy and the diabetes plate method during this time at home. My name is Jo Mandelson, Registered Dietitian Nutritionist and Associate Director of Nutrition here at the American Diabetes Association, and your host for today's program.
And my name is Shamira Robinson, Registered Dietitian Nutritionist, Certified Diabetes Care and Education Specialist, and Director of Nutrition here at the ADA, and co-host for today's program. Remember that our Ask the Expert series is all about answering questions from our listeners, so start getting your questions ready. For those of you on the phone, press *3 on your keypad, and an operator will collect your question and place you in the queue so that you may ask your question live. To participate online, all you have to do is type your name and question in the field below the streaming player. Once you press that Submit Question button, your question will come directly to us. Stay with us through the hour, and we will send you useful resources to help you live well on your journey with diabetes. In addition, we invite you to provide us with your feedback in our 5-question survey at the end of the event.
Okay, so now a little bit about why we're here today. Because of the link between diabetes and heart health, the American Diabetes Association, in collaboration with the American Heart Association, has launched No Diabetes by Heart. With support from our founding sponsors, the Boehringer Ingelheim and Eli Lilly and Company Diabetes Alliance and Novo Nordisk, as well as national sponsors Sanofi, AstraZeneca, and Bayer, the No Diabetes by Heart initiative provides tools and resources for people living with type 2 diabetes to learn how to reduce their risk of cardiovascular disease. As part of the initiative, the ADA is holding this free educational Q&A once a month. We'll cover information and tips to help you take charge of your health. The health and safety of all those we serve at the American Diabetes Association is always our top priority. The CDC has determined that COVID-19 is a serious public health threat. In general, people with diabetes face greater risk of complications when dealing with viral infections, and this is true with COVID-19. Current CDC recommendations to protect yourself state that you wash your hands often. If soap and water are not readily available, use hand sanitizer that contains at least 60% alcohol. Avoid touching your face. Practice safe social distance and put distance between yourself and other people if COVID-19 is spreading in your community. Cover your mouth and nose with a mask or cloth face cover when around others. The ADA encourages people with diabetes to follow the guidance of the CDC and to contact your medical provider if you suspect that you are showing symptoms or have been exposed to COVID-19. For our most up-to-date information, please visit our website at diabetes.org/coronavirus or call 1-800-DIABETES, that's 800-342-2383. Like many of you, we're also practicing social distancing, so we are so very proud to be presenting this month's Q&A from our very own living rooms. So, Shamira, I'm going to go ahead and pass it to you in your living room.
Thank you for that, Jo. Well, from my living room, I am so happy to introduce our expert, Connie Brown-Riggs. Connie is an award-winning registered dietitian, certified diabetes educator, and the author of several books, including Diabetes Guide to Enjoying Foods of the World, The African American Guide to Living Well with Diabetes, and Eating Soulfully and Healthfully with Diabetes. Over the course of her career, Connie has established herself as an expert in nutrition, diabetes, and the cultural issues that impact the health and the health care of people of color. Her work has appeared in books for health professionals and healthcare consumers, and she has been featured as an expert in national magazines such as Essence, Real Health, Diabetic Living, and Diabetes Forecast. She's a regular contributor to Today's Dietitian, serving on the magazine's advisory board and to blackdoctor.org. So I know I've named a lot, but I also have to mention that Connie has an amazing singing voice, and I know that has nothing to do with our call today, but I wanted to shout her out in that way as well. So welcome, Connie. We are so glad to have you with us today. Why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself?
Well, thank you, Shamira, and thank you for that shout out. Put a mic in front of me, and there's no telling what might happen. So I just might sing a little tune here today as well.
I love it.
Love that.
So, well, I am really excited to be here this afternoon. Like everyone else, I'm sitting here in my living room, and that is one of the, if you can think of a pro, that's one of the pros of being dealing with this pandemic that we're dealing with. We get to stay home a little bit more than usual. Okay, so I am ready whenever you are. I'm excited to be here.
Well, again, we are grateful to have you, so thank you for that, Connie. As we're waiting for our callers and our online listeners to chime in, I'm going to go ahead and throw out the first question here. So I know you mentioned that, you are a dietitian, a certified diabetes educator, and that you do a lot of one-on-one counseling. In nutrition counseling, we often mention the diabetes plate method as a starting point for building meals when talking to people with diabetes. Can you explain to us what the diabetes plate method is?
Well, the diabetes plate method is actually a technique that helps individuals with diabetes, but also it really can be used by anyone in terms of helping them to monitor their portions. It helps to control the amount of carbohydrate that one is consuming, and it also helps from the perspective of calorie control and eating healthy. So with the diabetes plate method, if you can visualize the plate, you would take half that plate, and half the plate would be filled with your non-starchy vegetable, your leafy green vegetables, cabbage and broccoli and asparagus would go into that section. And then the other half, divide in half again so that you have a quarter of the plate that would be for the starch. That would be for things like rice, pasta, what else? Potato would go into that section. And then the other quarter would be reserved for your protein, for if you have chicken or you have a slice of beef or fish, that would go in that section. So it really helps to control the amount of carbohydrate. And when I work with my patients, I always tell them it helps to give us repeatability as well. So if you're using the same plate, you're dividing it up appropriately, and let's say 2 hours after you eat that plate filled with food and you monitor your blood glucose, if it's higher than usual or than it should be, what your goals are for, let's say, 2 or 3 days, you're eating using the same plate, you end up with that result of blood glucose being higher, then the next day you can actually maybe have a little smaller portion on the plate. Or if you're eating, your plate is small, you still can follow that same basic rule. Once you get down to a certain portion, though, of course, we know that you can't restrict your food any further, and then there are other things that would have to take place. Excuse me. Maybe it's increasing your physical activity, or you may have to have a change in your medication. But basically, the plate method is an excellent tool, and as I say, I love it in terms of repeatability. And sometimes I often joke, even if someone is eating on a platter, if they divide it, like that plate method, half the platter is filled with leafy greens and the other quarter is filled with starch, it still helps them to control their food intake. Not that we want people to eat off a platter, though.
Right. I do love that message of consistency, so thank you so much for that, Connie. And listeners, if you're just joining us, welcome to today's Ask the Experts Q&A, Build Healthy Meals While Eating at Home. As a reminder for those of you on the phone, press *3 on your keypad and an operator will collect your question and place you in the queue so that you may have the opportunity to ask your question live. To participate online, type in your name and question in the field below the streaming player and press that submit question button, and your question will come directly to us. So let's go ahead and take some questions from our listeners. Connie, our first question is coming from Luella in Portsmouth, Virginia. Luella, you are live and on the air.
Yes. My question was, I need help in eating breakfast meals. I don't like a lot of stuff, so I want to know how can I eat healthy for breakfast.
Okay. Well, a lot of times what I start with is I ask the individual, what do you like to eat generally? And also think about, it doesn't necessarily have to be breakfast food. So I'm kind of picking up, maybe that's part of the problem. So we think of breakfast as typically being something like eggs and toast and cereal, those types of foods. And maybe you don't feel like that in the morning. Maybe you'd rather have leftovers from the night before. You might like to have a piece of chicken. If you had starch, again, think of that plate method that I just mentioned, and you'd have a potato, and you can have vegetable in the morning. You can have those leafy green vegetables that were left over from the night before. So that's one way to think in terms of eating a healthy breakfast. It does not have to be breakfast food. And then, of course, still thinking of the plate method for breakfast as well. The mentioned, the vegetable is good to have. So let's say you're having an omelet. You can add vegetables into the omelet, and you could also have a slice of toast along with that. I usually recommend 2 egg white and 1 whole egg in terms of an omelet. It makes it nice and fluffy, helps you to feel full, particularly if you load it up with vegetable. And then you could have a piece of fruit along with that. So that makes a healthy breakfast as well. There are many, many varieties of food that you can include in the morning. Avocado toast is another great breakfast, and there you have your starch, you have the avocado and an egg that goes along with that if you want. Put the egg on top, and that makes a good breakfast as well. And also you can have a piece of fruit with that. Most people don't eat enough in terms of fruits and vegetables because they're afraid that if they have a piece of fruit, it will make their blood glucose level go up. In most cases, it's not the fact that you're eating fruit, it's how much fruit that causes the problem. So there are many ways of getting in that good, healthy breakfast. And as I said, most important is don't necessarily think of breakfast foods. It does not have to be breakfast food in the morning.
I
Those are some
love that message and agree with you, because I think so many people get caught up on having to live in just this little box of breakfast foods, but one of my favorite things to do is just throw a side of spinach with some strawberries on top and maybe a little bit of cheese next to my eggs, because I am an egg lover. But, you know, that's perfectly fine to get a salad in the morning. Why not? You're getting some great fiber and some great vitamins as well in the morning. So just eating whatever really calls your name in the morning, not necessarily having to stick to those breakfast foods. So thank you for that, Connie.
Mm-hmm.
I thank you, Connie. I love that too.
You are welcome.
Just the other day when I got up, what was calling my name was my leftovers. I had some beef and broccoli with a little bit of rice that I warmed up in the morning, and it was the easiest thing for me. You know, I didn't feel like cooking. You know, sometimes we get up and we don't have the energy. I didn't feel like thinking about what to make or what to have for breakfast. So I said, oh, let me just heat up the leftovers that I have. And it was delicious and perfectly fine.
Oh, yeah. I eat leftovers. I can't tell you how often in the morning for breakfast, and particularly my husband. So he loves leftovers in the morning.
That's great. So I'm going to go ahead and go to our next caller, because she actually has a question about the plate method as well. So while we're talking about it, Sheldon, you are live and on the air, and he is from Elk Ridge, Maryland.
Thank you for taking my call. Yes, I not only eat leftovers for breakfast, but sometimes I'll eat breakfast for lunch or dinner. I'm wondering, is the plate method per meal or is it per day? If I don't eat starchy vegetables for one meal, non-starchy vegetables for one meal, can I double up the next meal? How does it work exactly? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for that question, Sheldon. The plate method is per meal. And ideally, you don't want to double up, particularly on the starch. Now, of course, everyone is an individual, and you may be able to eat a little bit more, but generally speaking, we're talking per meal. That's how you should be dividing up your plate.
Yep, and I agree with that. It's per meal, thinking about it per meal, but understanding that it's a personal thing and we're all starting from different points. So maybe when you look at your plate now, it doesn't look like the plate method that we're describing. So start to slowly challenge yourself and at each meal say, okay, how can I get my plate a little bit closer to the plate method that we're talking about? So say now maybe those non-starchy vegetables like the broccoli and the greens and the cauliflower that we talked about are only filling up a quarter of your plate. And so you slowly start to think, okay, well, let me add a little bit more and just keep adding until you can reach that whole half of your plate being the non-starchy vegetables.
And I think that's a great point. We actually do have another question talking about how to split that plate up again. So as a reminder, we're talking about the plate method, and we're looking at a 9-inch plate that we cut in half. Half of it is those non-starchy vegetables. So that's going to be like your broccoli, your carrots, your greens, those kinds of vegetables. The other half of the plate you divide in half again, and you get a quarter. That top quarter is going to be your carbohydrate foods. So your fruits, your brown rice, your whole grains, your starchy vegetables, and then that bottom quarter, that last little bit of the plate is going to be your protein foods. So that's going to be your chicken, beef, fish were the other examples that were mentioned. So really great questions coming in, guys. So keep them coming. Let's go ahead and
before we go to the next question, Joe, I just want to jump in. And I know we're talking about the plate method, so I just want to make sure that we're all clear and we all know where those different foods go. So we said half of that plate, the non-starchy vegetables, a quarter of your plate for the protein, and a quarter of your plate for those carbohydrates and those starchy foods. So we talked about things like our bread, rice, pasta going into that starchy quarter of the plate. But I want to be clear on the difference between those starchy vegetables and non-starchy vegetables. So when you think about things like potatoes, sweet potatoes, beans, whether it's black beans, garbanzo beans, pinto beans, lentils, all of those things fit into that starchy quarter of the plate. So while they're vegetables, they wouldn't go in that large section. They'd go in the small quarter of the plate, along with things like your fruit. And if you're thinking about milk and yogurt, those things also have a significant source of carbohydrates. So we want to make sure we're keeping those in mind as we're planning our meals and thinking about how things are going to impact our blood sugar.
Thank you for clarifying that, Shamir. That's a really good point for sure. So let's go ahead and go to our next caller. We have Sandy from Niagara Falls. Sandy, you are live and on the air.
Yes, my name is Sandy, and I am 77 years old. Recently, my appetite has changed. My desires for certain foods has changed. What can I do to keep eating healthy, but a variety of different things? And I also do not like breakfast foods. And I'm having trouble with meat, which started after I had had chemotherapy. So I find that a lot of things is in the smell.
Okay, so how are you, Sandy? And congratulations on being a very healthy senior citizen. You sound really strong, so that's a good sign. As far as the appetite, it's not unusual to have a change in appetite as you get older. What happens is your taste buds are not as acute as they were previously. And then also, if smells are a problem for you, it's important to try to cook foods that don't have a lot of strong smell that goes along with them. We talk about the aromas of food, but if it's too strong, it can also be a turnoff. So things, let's say Brussels sprouts that may have a strong smell. Fish can also have a very strong odor to it, an offensive odor for some people. So I would try to shy away from those types of foods. Also, eating small frequent feedings, as we call it. So because you don't have much of an appetite, oftentimes you just can't eat a lot at one time. So if you concentrate on spreading out your food, having a small breakfast, and maybe a couple hours after that, something else, so that you're getting sufficient amounts of calories. That's the most important thing at this particular stage, that you're getting those calories in and you're not losing weight. Breakfast foods, as we've established, it does not have to be breakfast food. So you might start off also by thinking about, maybe there are a list of 5, 6 foods that you know go down easy, you enjoy eating, they don't offend you from the aroma perspective. So just jot that down, make that list, and then look at those particular foods and see how you can work them in. Even though you'd like to eat a larger variety, the first step may be to let's look at what it is that you are able to eat and then go from there. Almost similar to what Shamira mentioned with the other caller in terms of the vegetables. Maybe you're only eating a small amount of vegetables. It may be the same vegetable over and over at this point. But that's a start, because you want to make sure you're getting sufficient amounts of calories in, and then we can go from there. Sometimes, depending on the individual that I'm working with in my office, we have to recommend a supplement. It may be, one of the drinks to go along with the meal, something like a glucerna, and that way you're getting the nutrients that your body needs, you're getting the calories. Although your food intake may be limited, you're still getting what your body needs to support healthy and to keep you sounding as strong as you sound right now.
Those are all wonderful tips, Connie. And I'll just also add, when you don't have an appetite, it can be difficult to remember to eat. So something that you could also try might be setting a timer throughout the day to remind yourself to have a bite or to have a snack from the list of foods that you already identified are a good fit for you. So that way you're not depending on those hunger cues or like a growling stomach to trigger you to find something to eat. But instead, you have that alarm as a reminder, like, oh man, I haven't eaten in a few hours. Let me at least try to grab a small snack and put something on my stomach. Okay, well, let's go to one of our online questions. We have a question from Ellen, and she wants to know, what is the latest time that she should eat dinner? And she also wants to know if snacks are allowed.
Okay. I'd like to look at that from a little different perspective. What I typically will tell my patients, because everyone's schedule is different, things happen unexpectedly that you may be, your meal may be later than usual. So my recommendation is for a meal, you want to make sure you stay up, active, like washing the dishes or something, at least 2 hours after that meal. And if it's a small snack, then we'll say maybe about an hour. So rather than say, well, you shouldn't eat after 6 o'clock or you shouldn't eat, at 8 o'clock at night, that's too late. It's better to look at it from the perspective, if you eat at 8, you cannot go to bed until 10 o'clock at least. So that's the best way to tackle that from the meal perspective. And did I
Great.
forget the other part of that question, Shamira?
Well, no, I think you covered it, but I know that's a question that a lot of people have are around snacking. So not only what time or if they're able to have snacks, but what are good snacks to have, especially around bedtime? Do you have recommendations for good bedtime snacks?
Oh, yeah. Typically, we like to have something with a little bit of carbohydrate and protein as well. A nice snack is you can make actually nachos. Have maybe just like 10 small nachos, 10 nacho tortilla chips rather, and an ounce of cheddar cheese, and a quarter of a cup of salsa to go along with that. And that, if you're counting carbohydrates, that's only 15 grams of carbohydrate for that snack. And it's going to be a filling snack because of the tortilla chips, as well as the cheese. So that should be satisfying. And then another nice snack is almonds, and actually have about an ounce of almonds. That's about 22 nuts. And have that along with 2 cups of popcorn. Popcorn, those 2 cups are also going to give you about 15 grams of carb, and there's no carb in the almonds. So generally speaking, and of course, as with everything, it depends on the individual, but generally speaking, about 15, 20 grams of carbohydrate is a good snack and works well for most people. Yogurt is another great snack in the evening. Okay.
I think you just named all my favorite snacks, so perfect. All right, so while we're talking about timing and eating at night, I'm going to go to our next caller, Cheryl from Florida. Cheryl, you are live and on the air. Cheryl, can you hear us? Okay, it looks like we might have lost Cheryl, but her question was along the lines of why might someone see a blood sugar rise at night if they didn't have food when they went to bed and then maybe it's high in the morning? Can you talk a little bit about what our blood sugar does in the evening and then when we're sleeping and why it might be high in the morning when we wake up?
Okay, that's not an unusual circumstance. That happens for many people, and we were just talking about snacks, and that's where the snack comes in as well. The snack can actually help to offset some of that elevated blood glucose that you end up with in the morning. Sometimes if you're not eating enough prior, if you had a small dinner or you didn't have a snack, that can cause your body to produce more glucose. Actually makes the blood glucose level go up as the body is trying to help to support itself. What do you call it? We keep the blood sugar level balanced. That's between the liver, which kicks in when it senses that your blood sugar level is going down somewhat, even if it doesn't have to be going abnormally low, but if it begins to go low, that's how the body regulates itself. And so what happens is tends to overreact, and you end up with higher blood glucose in the morning. So the best thing in terms of preventing that is to have a snack and to make sure that that snack has a combination of protein along with some carbohydrate. Also, oftentimes I will tell my patients to try to have something with a little more fiber in it as well. And that helps to give what I call a slow, steady release of glucose overnight, which helps to control the blood glucose level as well. So it's a matter of kind of playing around with the snack, seeing what snack works best for you. And there are some occasions where even when we manipulate the snack, we're trying different snacks, we still end up with that elevated blood glucose in the morning, and then there may need to be an adjustment in medication. But oftentimes, just manipulating that snack really helps to give a better outcome and to make sure you're including snacks. I also sometimes, depending on the individual and what's going on, will kind of situate their exercise so that in the evening, if they go for a walk, that also will help to drive that blood glucose level down and to keep that level down overnight so that they wake up with blood glucose. So there are many different things that we can do to manipulate the food or manipulate the physical activity to get the good results that we're looking for in the morning.
Great. So we've talked about a lot when it comes to the impact on those blood sugar levels. And now you've mentioned words like protein and carbohydrates, and we've also heard about fiber and fat. And can you just explain to our listeners how those things may impact their blood sugar? Or when they're thinking about foods that make their blood sugar rise, what are we really talking about there? Which foods should they focus in or be mindful of?
Okay, so there we're talking about when we say carbohydrate, this is really easy to remember. Everything that you eat except for pure animal protein and fat has a carbohydrate content. Now, some things have much less than others. That's why we emphasize the leafy green vegetables. They have very little carbohydrate. But the fact is they still have some carbohydrate. Protein and fat does not have carbohydrate. And what those foods tend to do is they help to slow down the release of glucose into the bloodstream after a meal. So this is one of the reasons that we recommend that combination. So when we're talking about protein, we're talking about animal protein. So that would be the protein that comes from beef or turkey, chicken, fish. That's really what we mean when we say protein from that perspective. And then, of course, fat is going to be salad dressing, any type of oil. What else goes in fat? Even bacon is actually part of that fat that we're talking about. We don't like you to have a lot of saturated fat, and that's what bacon is primarily, but that is part of the fat category. And then you notice that I said pure animal protein. And the reason I specify pure animal protein is because if it is a processed food, something like frankfurters, for an example, they can have bread filler added to them, and that will also impact the blood glucose. So if it doesn't have legs, if it doesn't have eyes, if it's not moving on the earth or flying in the air, it can have carbohydrate.
Thank you for that, Connie. So I actually think this goes well with our next caller who has a question about meat. Connie from Tulsa, Oklahoma. Connie, you are live and on the air.
Thank you for taking my call. I was asking the question, with this quarter of the plate that's reserved for protein, I'm not much of a meat eater, so what could I substitute in there that would help me to keep my blood sugar under control and give me the protein but is not meat? I just don't like the taste and stuff.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be meat. We have, people that eat primarily plant-based. It does take a little more precaution if you're using beans as a source of protein. And when you say meat, if you're just speaking of red meat, that's fine. If you never have a piece of red meat, the lean turkey is great. That's lean chicken as well as fish. So we actually recommend those over the red meat. So I'm not quite sure if that's what you were speaking of when you mentioned meat per se. But there are, many vegetarians that are getting sufficient amounts of protein, and they do that primarily by using nuts and seeds as the protein source. Also the beans, which, as I mentioned previously, will give you the protein as well. And then they have tofu. One thing that comes to mind is you do have to be very careful if you're getting any processed meat substitute. They also can be very high in carbohydrate as well. So you do have to watch that. So I'm not sure if the chicken and, if when you said meat, you meant the red meat. but there are certainly those other alternatives that are available.
For sure, and some other alternatives or some good options are even some nut butters. So like peanut butter, almond butter are going to have some great protein for you, and even eggs. Eggs are a great source of protein for people that are not interested in eating meat. So let's go on to our next caller. We have Marcia from Raleigh, North Carolina. Marcia, you're live and on the air.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I noticed when you're doing the plate, the half and then the quarter, and the quarter, one of the quarters for the carbs, you list bread, rice, and pasta. Can you substitute fruit instead of bread, rice, and pasta?
You can certainly do that, but you can also, for most people, they can have a piece of fruit, a serving of fruit, along with that rice, pasta. That section generally is only going to give you about 15 grams of carbohydrate. A small piece of fresh fruit, serving of fruit, 12 grapes or so, that's a serving of fruit. That's about 15 grams of carbs. So you're only going to have 30 grams of carbohydrate just from that. And then additionally, you have a glass of milk, 8 ounces of milk. That would be, on average, we'll say 15. Actually, it has 12 grams of carbohydrate, but just to round it all off. So you're going to have about 45 grams of carbohydrate. For the average person, that's not too much carbohydrate. But of course, if you're following a lower carb, you don't want to, have that much, you can substitute, have the fruit as opposed to having the starch in that section. You can do that.
Yep, and I love that. And sometimes you're absolutely right, Connie. People can choose to mix and match. Say you're going to, a dinner, or you're having a large dinner with your family, and you look and there are mashed potatoes on the table, but there are also, let's say, what am I thinking of? There's also a nice roll there, and then there's also maybe some corn on the table too. So you fix all your non-starchy vegetables, you get your protein, and you're wondering, okay, well, what am I going to add to this quarter plate for those starchy foods? Some people might say, hey, well, I really like mashed potatoes, so I'm going to go with that. Someone else might say, you know what, I'll do just a small little spoonful of my mashed potatoes and maybe a small spoonful of the corn, or just mix and match. But yeah, you are absolutely right. When we're thinking about those carbohydrate foods, where you do have the rice, the bread, and the pasta like we've talked about, but also thinking about your corn, your tortillas, your starchy vegetables like butternut squash and winter squash, sweet potatoes, beans, lentils, peas, all of those things would fit in that section, and you can swap them out as you may like.
All right, so a lot of great questions coming in. Keep them coming. As a reminder, if you want to ask Connie a question, go ahead and press *3 on your keypad, and it'll come directly to us. Or you can also, if you're online, type it into the streaming player and press the Submit Question button. So I'm going to go to Dorothy from Maryland. Dorothy, you're live and on the air with Connie.
Hello. I've got a question regarding the leafy green vegetables, since I'm on Coumadin. And I know that if you eat it all the time or have some kind of rhythm to it, that you can eat that. But I was always intermittently eating it in the past, and I wouldn't change. So and you said something about carrots were in that. Is that a good substitute?
Yes. When we talk about, we say leafy greens generally because it's just easier as a reference, but there are other vegetables that would fit into that category. Certainly carrots fits into that category. What else? Zucchini, squash, beets fit into that category. Onions, mushrooms. Let's see what else. Trying to think what else.
Celery, okra,
Yes.
peppers,
Thank
bell
you.
peppers.
Yeah, so there are a lot of vegetables, sure, that fit into that particular group that will not, be leafy greens. And you're absolutely correct in terms of, let's say, as you put it, the rhythm of the way that you're taking your green leafy vegetables. But if you don't care for them, you don't have to eat them. You have all of those other options.
All right. So let's go ahead and go to our next caller. Stephanie, we are live and on the air.
Good afternoon, ladies. A question, I'm a diabetes educator, and the question that I have is how do you make pizza work on the plate? Because all my patients tell me that no matter what they do, cauliflower crust, whatever, their sugars go up if they eat pizza.
Okay. Well, we'd have to look, the pizza doesn't really sit exactly on the plate, but if we use that frame of reference of about 45 grams of carbohydrate and they'd have to add up their ingredients. So generally speaking, for a slice of pizza, it's going to be about 30 grams of carbohydrate. And, of course, we know some is going to be a little larger than others, so it is a bit of a challenge when you're working with pizza. But generally speaking, about 30 grams of carbohydrate for a small slice of pizza. And then depending on what they put on top, it may add additional grams of carb, maybe another 15, maybe 10 grams of carb along with that. So I would start from that perspective to kind of, if they're making it themselves, you'd have to look at the recipe, add up the grams of carb from that recipe, and go from there. They may need to have a smaller slice, or they may find, generally that it's just not working for them. Most patients, though, that I work with are able to get a slice of pizza. The problem generally is they want 2 or 3 slices instead of that one slice. But that's the way I would start with that patient. I would just add up, look at the recipe, add up those grams of carbohydrate, and let's see what happens at that point. Whether she can adjust, have a smaller slice, or, change the recipe a little bit as well to lower the carbohydrate.
That's great, and that's such a great question. I love it so much because it brings us to the real world. So often we talk about these concepts of the plate method and these ideal scenarios, but hey, we really have to embrace and meet people where they are starting from. So for instance, you think about someone having pizza. If they're regularly having pizza, say someone is regularly having 5 slices of meat lovers pizza. And that is like a tradition for them. Let's say Friday nights, it's always, they order their large pizza, they're having 5 slices of meat lovers pizza. And while that might not necessarily fit into the plate method as we know it, there's still room to work around it and just going back to that, okay, these food choices are personal, and it may not look like this ideal standard, but how can I slowly push myself to get closer to that in a way that works for me? So maybe it is cutting back from the 5 slices of meat lovers to going to 2.5 slices of meat lovers. Maybe it's going to, 3 slices of pizza, but instead trying a supreme pizza where they add vegetables or getting veggie toppings on that pizza. Maybe it is going down to 1 slice and then knowing you're still going to need more food to feel full. So you add a salad on the side, or you find a vegetable that you enjoy that you can have on the side with that pizza, so you're still getting that volume to feel full. There are definitely strategies to work with it. So I don't want anyone to feel discouraged if they feel like where they are now is still far away from the plate method that we're talking about. Instead, we really want you to feel empowered to know that you can work your way there and you can do it in a way that fits what you like, that fits the foods that you enjoy, and in a way that works for you.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. And oftentimes, one of the other things is to understand what that patient perceives as being elevated blood glucose, because it still may not be out of range. It may be a little bit higher than what they would anticipate, but not necessarily out of range. And Shamira, you hit it right on the nose. I see this all the time. It's the amount. It's the number of slices that they're having. So I totally agree with that.
And what I loved about that call, too, is that it was a diabetes educator. So thank you so much for that call. I think it gives me an opportunity to talk a little bit about diabetes self-management education programs. These are really great programs that are available for people with diabetes so that they can focus on their own personal concerns with diabetes and empower people with the knowledge to manage their diabetes. We have a link on our website that will help you find a program in your area. So if you're interested in finding a program that will help you, visit diabetes.org/experts. You can also call 1-800-DIABETES. That's 1-800-342-2383 and ask a member of our call center with assistance in identifying a program near you. I do want to note, though, that these programs do require referral from your healthcare provider, so make sure that you talk to your doctor and get that referral so that you can find a program that's near you. So let's go ahead and go to our next caller, Connie. We have Susan from LA. Susan, you are live and on the air.
Okay, hi. Yeah, my question is this. When you read labels on foods, it has based on 2,000 calorie diet. Now, I have to watch my diet on two levels, not only on pre-diabetes, but also I have a blood disease where I have two high red blood cells. And I did talk to a nutritionalist, and she said something about these 2,000 calories that, when you apply that, it changes. Well, she was pertaining to iron, but I didn't really understand what she meant about that. Could you explain that?
Generally, with the nutrition facts label, it is based on the percentage of vitamins and that information, percentage of carbohydrate and so on, is based on 2,000 calories. And that's why most of the time I would tell my patients to ignore the percentage, look at what the serving size is. You want to know how many calories are in that serving. And then also carbohydrate. We focus on the carbohydrate because that's what has the major impact on the blood sugar. And then, of course, now with the new updated label, you're also able to look at any added sugar that may be in that particular product. But as you said, if you're not following 2,000 calories, then that percentage is very misleading and really not useful for you. So I would ignore the percentage and concentrate on the portion, what they consider a serving size, how many calories are in that serving. If it says it'll tell you sodium, I would look at the milligrams of sodium, the grams of carbohydrate, as opposed to the percentage, because the percentage will be misleading unless you're eating 2,000 calories.
And Connie, I think this is a really great opportunity for us to talk a little bit too about, there's so much on the nutrition labels, and I feel like we could just talk about that for hours, especially as dietitians. But I do think this is a great opportunity for you to maybe explain the total carbohydrate number for people, for our listeners, and maybe a little bit about what it means and how the label gets to that number, and a little bit about the new addition to the new nutrition label of added sugar. Do you mind touching on that a little bit?
Okay, sure. So let's start with the added sugar. As I said, that's as you mentioned, and I mentioned also, that's one of the new additions. When you have total carbohydrate, let's use fruit for an example. you looked at the nutrition facts label for fruit, all the carbohydrate is the carbohydrate that's naturally occurring in that fruit. If you looked under where it would say added sugar, there would be no added sugar for a piece of fresh fruit. So if you had a nutrition facts label for fresh fruit, you'd see total carb that's naturally occurring, and there would be no added sugar. Whereas a processed item, let's say, I'm going to use, I don't know, well, any baked goods, for an example, even some breads will actually have added sugar. So you have the total carbohydrate that's in that product that includes added sugar. And with the old label, it was hard to tell how much of that carbohydrate was naturally occurring, how much of that carbohydrate was man-made, was added to the product. Now you're able to distinguish, and it helps you to pick a healthier item. So you want to stay away from foods that have a lot of added sugar to them and stick to those that have no added sugar. So that's one of the great benefits, and it also can help you in terms of evaluating your blood glucose level. For many people, foods that have a lot of added sugar have a different effect, different impact on their blood glucose level than carbohydrate that is naturally occurring in the foods. And when we talk about carbohydrate, it is actually the total amount of carbs, so it includes the sugar. It also includes fiber that's in that item. So when you read that total carbohydrate number, it is adding up all of those things, the fiber, the sugar, as well, the naturally occurring sugar, and the added sugar as well.
Exactly. And I know as far as ADA guidance, when you are looking at those carbohydrates and wondering how to keep track of those things, if you're counting your carbs, we do recommend looking at that total carbohydrate number. So including, all of the starches, all of the fiber, all of the sugar, and just looking at that total carbohydrate number. And I thought you offered a great example of looking at those added sugars versus natural sugars, or the sugars that are just naturally in different foods. Some examples I could think of, for instance, would be juice, right? So you talked about fruit and how fruit has that natural sugar, so that fruit is naturally sweet. And so if you just have some fresh squeezed juice where they're just using the juice from the fruit itself, you shouldn't see any added sugar because they're just using the natural sweetness from the juice of the fruit, orange juice, let's say. But then you might look at some other juices where you see it does have added sugar. So that means not only is there the natural sugar from the orange juice itself, but the manufacturer went back and added more sugar to make it taste more sweet. And so now that we have that added sugar line, we can look at products and really see the difference and say, oh, is this the natural sugar that occurs in this food, whether it's, fruit or fruit juice or yogurt? Or did the manufacturer, when they were making this food, go in and add more sugar? And sugar can look like a lot of different things. It could be sugar, it could be corn syrup, it can be brown rice syrup, all these different things. But it really gives us a way to see if they went back and added some additional source of sweetness in there that could have a significant impact on your blood sugar.
I think those are some really excellent points and really great examples. Thank you so much, Shamira and Connie. So I think we have time for one more caller. We have Sarah from Huntsville, Alabama. Sarah, you are live and on the air.
Yes, ma'am. I just wanted to ask two quick questions. I had high sugar at one time, and of course, through eating and thankful for y'all's programs, it has helped me to be able to get my sugar down to normal levels. But I'm wondering if the plate is still good also for low sugar, because I went from having high sugar to now having low sugar. It's like I've done so well on it, I'm having low sugar now. And also my second part question is, I need to exercise, but I'm terrified to exercise because normally when I have time to exercise it's before bed, but I also don't want to exercise and make my sugars go too low. So maybe when would be the best time to exercise before you go to bed at night?
Okay. So the first part of the question was the plate method in terms of helping to prevent you from going low. So you're controlling blood sugar. Great. At this point, you went from one extreme, in a sense, to the other, where now you're running into problems going low. You may not be getting enough carbohydrate in your meal plan, and so following the plate method will help you, as I mentioned earlier, to have some repeatability. And if you're following that plate method, you're still having low blood glucose, it may mean that you require a bit more carbohydrate. So along with the plate, you'd want to make sure you have a piece of fruit going along with that. You may also add in an additional slice of bread, so that's an additional serving of starch to bring the carbohydrate level up. I would recommend doing that slowly because you don't want to make your blood glucose go up too high. So maybe for 3 consecutive days, try to eat about the same amount of carbohydrate at the meal and check your blood glucose 2 hours after. And that will help you to determine after 3 days, because we have to give it time to see if it's working, then you would determine whether or not you need to add additional carbohydrate, or maybe you've gotten enough carbohydrate at that point to help stabilize. Another way that you may look at this is to have a snack between the meal. So rather than add the carbohydrate with the meal, you may make sure that you have a snack of about 15 to 20 grams of carbohydrate between your meals. One other point is ideally you don't want to have to feed a low, as we call it. And so if you're continually having those lows, and of course you don't want to eat too much to gain weight and so on, I would recommend you speak to your doctor, your healthcare provider. Maybe there needs to be an adjustment in your medication so that you can still eat the food that you're comfortable eating, not gain weight, and not have problems with the low blood glucose. But the plate method certainly is a starting point as far as stabilizing.
I love that, Connie. I think those are wonderful tips. And I just want to add, of course, this program is not meant to be medical advice, but more so just instructions and offering guidance for you to take to your healthcare team. I think one other area to explore, we didn't get a chance to follow up, but wondering if you're taking any medications. So if you are taking any medications that would be lowering or helping to lower your blood glucose, that could be an opportunity for you to go back to your healthcare provider and say, hey, these are my numbers. I've made some changes when it comes to my activity. I've made changes when it comes to the foods that I'm eating. And I think that it's time for us to look at the medications I'm taking and seeing where I can adjust those things. So I think some really great tips to remember. It could either be adding more carbohydrate sources throughout your day, so whether that be adding more at your meal time or adding snacks in between your meals to help you stay within your target range, or if you're taking medications, you can talk to your provider about potentially lowering some of the doses for those medications so that you're staying within range more often. And I know we talked so much about the plate method during today's broadcast, and there were a few questions that we didn't get to regarding which foods go into the different sections. So before we close out, I just want to quickly run through some of those foods just as a note to everyone, and then see how we can distribute that information following the call. So again, half of that plate, your non-starchy vegetables. That includes your leafy greens like spinach, kale, collards, mustard greens, but can also include things like asparagus, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, zucchini, squash, cucumbers, cauliflower, eggplant, okra, bell peppers, bean sprouts, radishes, salad greens, tomatoes. A quarter of your plate being those starchy foods, and those are the foods that are going to have the most impact on your blood sugar. And those include things like your pasta, rice, bread, tortillas, also starchy vegetables like corn, winter squash, potatoes, sweet potatoes, beans, peas, and lentils, and also thinking about your fruit, so whether that's berries, melons, apples, oranges, and milk and yogurt as well. In the last quarter, to really round out that plate, are our protein foods. So you have your chicken, fish, turkey, all your different types of seafoods. Also can incorporate things like lean beef and lean pork there, eggs, cheese, shrimp, tofu, tempeh, and other plant-based sources as well. So that is a quick and dirty rundown of the plate method, and that wraps up our last question for the session. A few items before we close today. Consider staying online or on the phone to complete a short 5-question survey. We want to hear from you, and we hope you will take a few minutes to provide us with your useful feedback.
To help you feel confident about your ability to manage your diabetes and heart health, we encourage you and your loved ones to talk to your doctor and dietitian about your risks. Go to nodiabetesbyheart.org and learn more. Register for the next event at diabetes.org/experts. Sign up for for diabetes education near you, and sign up for the ADA's free Living with Type 2 Diabetes program. All these links are on the Ask the Experts registration webpage, diabetes.org/experts. If you have questions about this event, want resources to find diabetes education classes in your area, or would like to receive an informational packet to learn more about living with type 2 diabetes, you're welcome to contact us at askada@diabetes.org or call 1-800-DIABETES. That's 1-800-342-2383. Thriving with Diabetes takes a village, and we're here to support you. Special thanks to our expert, Connie Brown-Riggs. I'm Joe Mandelson, and on behalf of the ADA team, we want to thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to connecting with you at our next Ask the Expert event, Diabetes and Eye Health, in 2 weeks on June 23rd, 2020 at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'll turn it over to the survey portion to close out our program. Best wishes for good health.
All right, thank you for joining us today, and we appreciate your feedback on today's event. To provide your responses, press the corresponding number on the keypad of your phone. And for participants online, please click on the poll section below the Ask a Question form and click to submit your responses. Okay, here's our first question. Overall, how satisfied were you with today's event? Build healthy meals while eating at home. Use a scale from 1 to 5, with 1 being not at all satisfied and 5 being very satisfied. I'll repeat that one time for you. Overall, how satisfied were you with today's event? Build healthy meals while eating at home. Use a scale from 1 to 5, with 1 being not at all satisfied and 5 being very satisfied. And while we take a moment for our next question to come up, I'd like to remind you about one of our programs supporting people living with type 2 diabetes. If you are recently diagnosed or could benefit from a refresher, consider signing up for ADA's free program, Living with Type 2 Diabetes. Participants receive information via email and e-booklets throughout the year-long program on topics including emotional health, eating healthy, and physical fitness, as well as tips on managing and living well with type 2 diabetes. All right, here's our next question. Which of the following foods have carbohydrates? Press 1 for pasta, press 2 for bread, press 3 for fruit, or press 4 for all of the above. And I'll repeat that one time. Which of the following foods have carbohydrates? Press 1 for pasta, press 2 for bread, press 3 for fruit, or press 4 for all of the above. And before we go on to question 3, we would like to let you know that if you missed a part of today's event or would like to listen again, we now have full recordings available by phone. You can call the toll-free number 866-686-8240 to hear the latest recording. And again, that phone number is 866-686-8240. You can also listen to full recordings on our website at diabetes.org/expert. All right, here's question 3. What should you fill half of your plate with? Press 1 for protein, press 2 for carbohydrates, press 3 for non-starchy vegetables, or press 4 for fruit. And I'll repeat that again. What should you fill half of your plate with? Press 1 for protein, press 2 for carbohydrates, press 3 for non-starchy vegetables, or press 4 for fruit. And before we move on to the next question, we would like to remind you again that our next Ask the Experts Q&A event will be held on June 23rd at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Our guest expert will discuss diabetes-related eye disease and how to protect your vision. To register, go to diabetes.org/expert or contact us at 1-800-DIABETES. That's 1-800-342-2383. Okay, here's question 4. As a result of this event, how likely are you to schedule a visit with your healthcare provider to talk about the link between heart disease and diabetes? Press 1 for not likely, press 2 for somewhat likely, or press 3 for very likely. And I'll repeat that again. As a result of this event, how likely are you to schedule a visit with your healthcare provider to talk about the link between heart disease and diabetes? Press 1 for not likely, press 2 for somewhat likely, or press 3 for very likely. And while we await the last question, remember that a diabetes self-management education and support program referenced earlier will focus on your concerns about diabetes. This program will empower you with the knowledge and skills to help you manage your diabetes. A link to find an ADA-recognized diabetes education program can be found at the bottom of our Ask the Experts webpage, which again is diabetes.org/expert, or you can speak to a member of our call center at 1-800-DIABETES to learn where a program near you is. All right, here is our final question. As a result of this event, how likely are you to sign up for or continue to participate in a diabetes self-management education program? Remember, diabetes education programs usually require a referral from a healthcare provider. And I'll repeat that again. As a result of this event, how likely are you to sign up for or continue to participate in a diabetes self-management education program? Press 1 for not likely, press 2 for somewhat likely, or press 3 for very likely. All right, thank you for staying with us and providing your feedback on today's event. We offer many thanks to today's expert, Connie, as well as our support vendors and sponsors and the No Diabetes by Heart collaboration. This concludes today's program in the Ask the Experts Q&A series. If we have your email address on file, expect to receive an email with resources from today's event. You can also go onto our website, diabetes.org/expert, to download the resources. You can click on the June 9, 2020 event page under past recordings to find links to the resources as well as clips of the full recording from this event. And lastly, if you have any additional questions, please stay on the line and leave a message with your name and phone number, and a member of our call center will follow up with you soon. Thank you.